Hi, Kathy here from Eclectic Images, and thank you for joining me for another Crafting with Kathy. Today we're going to be doing a journal page, so it's a bit bigger canvas to work on than my normal cards that I do, which is going to be fun. A little bit daunting sometimes when you're working on a bigger canvas, but loads of fun. So we're going to be working with the BeeArty stencils and dies and their paper pack, but throw in an Eclectic Images stamp in there as well. So our stamp that we're using is Ashley's Close-Up, which is Ashley's face. We'll then use the Calendula and the Fine Feathers dies. We're using the Bohemian Bliss paper pack, and I've chosen a nice one that's got lovely pink motley background with some patterns over it, plus the gorgeous flowers in there. And I've chosen this because I like the patterns, but also I'm going to focus my decorating up here, leaving a fairly light area down there to actually do my journaling later. Now with this piece, I actually, by trimming it back from the 12 by 12, it's left me with this lovely offcut, which could make 2 standard size cards or 1 slimline card. Talking about using up offcuts. Offcuts from yesterday is how I've die cut my flowers and things and the feathers. So making the most of these beautiful papers. Now the inks that I'm using today, we'll be using some Versamagic chalks for colouring in Ashley. So I've chosen Magnolia Bud, Sierra Vista for some blush colour, and some Jumbo Java for her hair. We'll use the Peppermint Scrub out of the Catherine Pooler Paradise Found pack of minis. And we'll be working on the watercolour cardstock from Uniquely Creative with just a little bit of some colouring with the Uniquely Creative markers as well. So there's all our stuff. Our basic stamping has been done with the Catherine Pooler archival black ink. But the first thing we're going to do, I want to add a little bit of texture to this with some texture paste. So we'll do that first, which will give it time to dry while we get our other bits organised. And I'm wanting to focus that mainly on our bottom corner, but with a little bit around some of the other corners as well. To get the colour I want, I'm going to be using the Peppermint Scrub ink and actually adding my texture paste to that. So I've got my Ranger texture paste, which is a lovely creamy one, but also dries fairly quickly. We could also use the BeeArty range, actually has some beautiful coloured texture pastes, but they're quite glossy, whereas I was wanting this to be more of a matte finish. So that's why I've chosen to actually colour my own, which will give a more boring look. The BeeArty ones are beautifully metallic and shiny, but that's not what this page needs. I certainly like working with those when I'm looking for that lovely gloss. So I'm putting some ink onto my craft mat there. I could also, if I had some re-inker, I could just drop some re-inker on. Then we grab some texture paste and we're going to mix it in with that ink and create a paste the colour that we want it to be. Now the only problem with doing this is sometimes you don't mix enough paste, and then you just got to make do with what you've got. But it's a great way of making a paste that's really going to match the inks and stuff that you're working with. Let's add a little bit more paste. And I'm just scraping it into all of that ink so I can pick up all of that ink colour into it and get it the colour I want. Of course, if you don't have it, if it's not coming up dark enough, we could always add some more ink from our ink pad or from our re-inker. But just mixing it, making sure we've got all that colour through. And it's looking nice and even. And I think that's a really good match to some of our flowers there, so I'm ready to go. Now I've just got one of the BeeArty text and texture stencils. You could use any text or texture stencil for what we're doing here. This just happens to be a pretty cool one. So I'll just line my text up so it's on the page, and I've got a little bit of texture coming on there as well. And then just scrape our paste through. Now I don't want to build up too thick a layer. It's one thing with a journal page compared with something like a canvas or a book cover or something. We want this to actually be quite flat because we want our journal to be able to close. So although I'm wanting to create texture, I don't want too much. So I can really scrape that out quite thin, and you'll find if you scrape it, by scraping it, I'm scraping it into that pattern but also I'm scraping off any excess so I can then keep using that. Let's come up the side here a little bit more. Remember, I'm not wanting to come in too far because I want to leave this open area for doing the writing. So we're just sort of faded off a bit as we head up the page, but just making sure that we are getting some through the stencil. So pressing it in and then scrape off any excess. Then we can very gently lift our stencil out of the way. Oh, that's so cool. Now I'm going to use a bit of paper towel, which I have some paper towel here. Let's move our page slightly. And I'm just checking that there's not little bits over the edge there. Just wipe those away. Sort of thing where you get your hands into it and get a bit messy, but we're also going to use our paper towel just to clean particularly the back of the stencil a little bit. Just make sure there's no excess bits there that are going to be getting in the way as we do our next bit. And we could also scrape up that and reuse it. Now I don't think we need any in the top there where the flower is, but certainly in this corner here. So I'm looking for another bit of stencil that's going to work well. Push it through and then scrape it. Make sure you don't go over the edge of your stencil, otherwise you'd get a straight line there, which wouldn't work very well. I'm trying to keep this edge quite ragged. Oh, wonderful. Again, I'm just going to lift it gently, just wipe off any edges that have got, any spots that have gone over the edge, and I'm going to put a little bit in the bottom corner there. Now at this stage I'm getting enough on my craft mat that I need to actually wipe it back a little bit so that I don't put my bit of paper, my journal page, into a whole pile of it. So let's lift ourselves back on again, and we're just going to add a little bit more down that side there. Check I haven't got too much on the back. And pop on mainly the textured part there rather than the writing. And I've got just a little bit of paste left, which is fine because I just want to do a little bit of texturing. So smoosh it in, scrape off the excess. Okay, pop that to one side. I'll get that in, that and the stencil washed fairly quickly after I finish this project. It can also be a good idea to have a bucket of water. It's just a bit of warm water or soapy water that you can just drop your stencils into so that the texture paste doesn't dry on those. Now that's going to dry reasonably quickly, so I'm just going to leave it to one side while we do our other bit of decorating. And we'll clean our mat, which means I'll grab my water spritzer and just clean that off. If it does dry on your mat, that's okay. You can scratch and clean it off later, but it's better, and particularly because we're going to be working on this, it's better to give it a clean while it's still wet. Okay, now let's grab our Ashley piece, and I'll bring up my scrap paper pad to work on. So with the Ashley piece, I've already stamped this with the Catherine Pooler ink, and I did use my stamping platform because it is a watercolour card that's fairly absorbent. I gave it a couple of stampings with the platform to get it nice and black. And I've already started tearing around the design just to save a little bit of time, but I've left a bit so I can show you how I tore it. Now to colour her nice and quickly, the easiest way is to stamp and cut out a mask, which we can then fit over her face, and that means that we can colour very quickly without worrying about going over our edges. And this is where I'm going to bring in and use our chalk inks. And first we'll go with the Magnolia Bud. Now that I choose the chalk inks because they give a lovely soft foundation-y look, but also they dry waterproof, which means that if I'm wanting to do any watercolouring or anything over the top, these are going to dry and they're not going to smudge when we do any other stuff to them. For this particular piece, I'm not going to be doing a lot of watercolouring except her lips and eyes, so it probably wouldn't matter, but they do give such a good base colour that I like working with them anyway. Now, I often tend to leave the centre of the face with less ink on so it's naturally highlighted, and that doesn't look like I've put much on, but when you lift the scrap paper off you can see that I have. And I just want to, when I get to the bottom of the neck there, I don't want it being in that straight line. Now, just checking that that is still in place nicely, we'll add some Sierra Vista to give her some blusher. So pop the lid back on that one, grab our Sierra Vista. Now these two colours only come as a large size pad. They've got about 4 or 5 colours that only come in a large size. I don't know why, when the rest come either as large size or as the dewdrop size. But we do have these two in stock in the large size. Of course, that's something where I tend to like collecting ink pads in the larger size. I prefer to work with that. But for a lot of people, the smaller size pads means that you can build up your collection of colours much easier. So that's what I tend to stock mostly. But if you're wanting to purchase inks in the larger size and they're not on my website, you can always let me know and I can order them in for you. Now, going to grab some Jumbo Java for her hair. And this time we're going to change masks, and you can see how nice that blush is looking. Oh, before I finish there, I just didn't give her any eyeshadow. It's always nice to add a little bit of warmth over her eyes. And this is where your mask is really good to use. So I'll just dust a little bit in there and a bit on that side there. It's really good to work from the mask on that side. So that just gives her a little bit of extra warmth. Now with our other mask, and these masks, once you've cut them, you use them over and over again. So even though it's a little bit of a hassle when you first make them, it's very worth it and you'll get the use out of them. So just placing that over her hair. And now I'm going to be quite rough with this because I actually don't want her hair looking all even and smooth like I did the foundation. I want the hair to be more textured, so to have some light spots and dark spots. I'm also tending to go a little bit stronger on the outer part of her hairline and a little bit softer as I get to that inner part, because I'm actually going to want I don't want a hard edge there, so I'm going to want to add some colour from the brush directly to that part. The other thing I'm thinking with why I chose Jumbo Java for her hair is that we're going to be layering some light coloured die cut flowers over the top. So by giving her a darker hair colour, it's going to make those flowers stand out a little bit more. So once I'm happy with that depth of colour, let's lift the mask out of there, and then I can just come in and just shade the edge there with the brush a little bit just to soften out any hard lines. Excellent. So she is looking just a bit gorgeous and ready for her next adventure. Now we will give her some, this is where I'm going to use the Uniquely Creative markers to give her some lip colour and eye colour. And I've chosen a deep plummy lip colour just because I know it's going to match in with the darker part of the flowers on the paper and also with some embossing that we're going to do. So let's colour her lips. Now I do like to put on some colour and then use my water brush just to soften that out a little bit. It would help if I actually got my water brush flowing before I started. That's better, get some actual water happening. And of course you then go from nothing to way too much. Let's grab a little bit of paper towel and dab that off a bit. Just knock that back a little bit. Way too enthusiastic. Okay, so start that again. Colour on her lips. Then add a little bit of water just to soften that out a bit. Then we'll add some colour to her top lip. still a bit wet, which means the colour brush isn't wanting to go onto the card as well as I'd like it. That's better. That's much better. And I think we can go back and add a bit more on the bottom lip too. Nice. Now her eyes, I'm just going to do full strength with the green. Won't need our water brush for that. And actually going to go over it a couple of times just to build up a bit of depth with that green colour. Now to choose these colours, I actually coloured them out on a bit of paper and then held them close to the flowers on the pattern paper so I could see what colours toned in best. And that way I could see that this green toned in nicely with the foliage on the page and the lips toned in nicely with the depth of the flowers. So that's all that Ashley needs. But we're going to still tear around the rest of her. I didn't want her just to be on a solid shape on this page. I wanted her to have a little bit of a ragged, softer looking edge. Now you can just tear the card, but I do find that if I use a wet brush and actually wet the card first, it's going to make it tear more where I want it to tear. Now, of course, this works beautifully on just normal paperweight. On cardstock, it's a little bit more tricky to get it to tear where you want it, but the water certainly helps. But it's not going to soak all the way through. Like if you did it on just paper, we could just pull it and it would just tear away really easily. Because it's cardstock, yes, the water will help, but I'm still going to have to be a little bit careful. So I'm still supporting my design with my thumb so that I'm making sure I don't tear over the design part that I want to keep. Now you can tear two different ways with card. If you tear the top up that way, you'll get more of a rough edge there, but a little bit less control. If I tear downwards, I'll get a smoother edge and it's a little bit easier, but either way works nicely. So tearing around there, getting it to follow that water line. Just try and get that last little bit to go where I want it to go. That probably won't, but that's nice. It's just softer than cutting it. Okay, so now we can actually look at preparing our die cuts. So as well as the fine feather one comes with a solid shape and then an outline to go with it. So I've cut that out of a paler piece of the pink card, and now we're going to emboss this, but I'm going to emboss it with inking it up with the peppermint scrub first, which will give it a lovely dark plummy shade, and then emboss it with some clear powder. So let's get our two pieces ready for that, and I'm going to do one of the small flowers with that as well as a centre for one of our bigger flowers. So we'll put all our other die cut pieces to one side at the moment, get our embossing catching paper ready and our clear powder ready. Now the Catherine Pooler inks, it's a dye ink, but it is so rich that it does mean that you can emboss with it, but you don't have forever. You've still got to move reasonably fast. And somewhere here I should have my tweezers standing by ready. So let's ink our piece up there. And then very quickly pop it with some clear powder. Excellent. Doesn't look much at the moment, but once you start heating it, it's a bit magic. Now, if I was actually just at home creating, where I'm building up a bit of ink on my scrap paper there, I'd then put water on that and create some nice smushy backgrounds and not waste it. But here we're concentrating on getting these feathers done, so I'm going to have to waste that bit of ink that's there. But yes, if I was just doing this for myself, I could do some wonderful backgrounds out of that. and then have to remember where I was up to with my card to come back to it, wouldn't I? Okay, let's pick that up. Shake some powder on. I've got plenty of powder there that I can just rub it into. Make sure everything looks covered. Oh, missed a bit. Excellent. Okay, now lid on our ink pad. Embossing powder back in the jar. We don't want to be blowing all this around once we get our heat gun out. And I'm also going to clear my craft mat before we start heating and smushing things around. So let's just give that a wipe. And I'll just give it a spritz and another wipe because I know it's such a dark colour. If there's anything of it left there, it would still come off, as you can see on the paper towel there. So that's making sure it's nice and clean. Okay, now heating. Heating is a bit of a challenge when you've got little flowers like this or feathers and things because they're going to want to run away. So I'm going to pin it down. It's still going to try and run away on me. Move the heat away for a minute. I can hold another bit. See how good that colour goes? I've got it all, yep. Okay, let's bring the next piece in. And I can actually separate the tweezers there and it's going to help hold it a bit better. You could also hold a piece, actually pinch a bit in the tweezers. And then once you've actually heated that bit, so you could hold it in the tweezers at this end, and then once you've heated this end, you move the tweezers around to the other end. So I'm just going to shift that there, hold it down at that point. Okay, move that to the side, bring this one in. It's going to be tricky on me. Okay. Alright, you're being tricky. Let's move the tweezers in and actually pin it down a bit more. There we go. Now, if I'd actually damaged some of the previous embossing, of course I can come over it and just reheat it and that embossing would smooth out again. I hope you could hear what I was saying over the top of the embossing gun there. Okay, so that's our pieces. And of course, where we've inked up with a different amount of ink, it comes out looking, you get a variation to the colouring, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's bring our Ashley piece in, our background piece in, and we've got our other die cut bits that we've already done. So I pre-did those just to save time. So we've got the Calendula flowers, which are these gorgeous little outline flowers. Now I'm not going to shape any of these because I do want the page to stay not too raised up in texture. I want it to be fairly flat in my journal. Now I could stick her down with some double-sided tape as well as a bit of glossy accents around the edges. It's a bigger piece, so I don't want to do glossy accents over the whole lot. So we'll just pop a couple of bits of tape on. Pull our backing off there. Now you could use glossy accents, you could use the multimedia matte glue or another glue of your choice. This is just one that I happen to like working with. I find it doesn't take too long to dry and to stick, but I do like using my tweezers just to pick my piece up so I can actually see where I want to put it before I actually set it down. Now remember, we're trying to leave some blank area down there. So I'm placing that down. Well, I find with the Glossy Accents, if I pop it down, leave it for a moment and do something else and then come back to it, it will have already gone tacky, and then when you push it down a second time, you get a really good stick. So this is one of our feathers. Now if you don't go too close to the edges, if there's a little bit of ooze, it's not going to show, but I do need to get right to the tips of the feathers or petals on some of those sticking out bits.
26.
So I want this one hanging down so it's almost like an earring. Let's have a look how this one fits with the texture paste that's there, curling around that feather. Now let's come back and just give these bits a push down. As I said, the glue will have become a little bit tackier, so we can press it down and get a bit more sticking. Now the trickiest part is going to be these fine bits. So I'm giving the glue just the lightest of squeezes. I'm not too fussed about covering every little fine bit, but I do want the edges well covered, and that little spine bit needs to have glue all the way along it. Any little pointy bits like that, I was going to say freestanding. It's not quite freestanding, but you know what I mean. Make sure I get right to the end there. Grab our tweezers. Get one bit positioned right, and then we can sort of push the rest into shape. The other thing I find with Glossy Accents is if you end up with a few little bits where you didn't want it, it just looks like lovely little raindrops and things. So it's actually not too bad if you do get a bit of ooze or a few drops. And it doesn't stay tacky, which is important if you get extra little bits of it. Now it's not going to stick down immediately. I'm going to get the next bit glued and then come back and put some pressure on that. I'm now thinking this is where if I'd actually die cut these with a little bit of double-sided, the extra thick double-sided tape on the back, could have saved me a bit of time, but that's okay. Push it into place, press it down, and then let's come back into this one. Smooth it all down. And see how it starts to stick really well. Now, let's get our other flowers in. So we've got big one, a couple of mediums and a couple of smaller ones. Let's stick that one in amongst those ones, so we'll stick him down first. And these ones, I might do a couple of drops around, but I can basically just stick them down at the centre of the flower. That's a big enough area that will then hold it. So let's tuck him under there. Got a very friendly pooch wandering around under the table, wanting to know why I'm not paying her any attention. This is layering up very nicely. you're doing a bit of wander. Give you a bit of encouragement to stick down. There we go. And we've got one last little flower that I've die cut, and that's the other one that we have already embossed, and we're going to pop that one just on the centre of this flower, but maybe just offset it slightly. So there's our page. My last little bit, as I'm just sort of chatting and saying goodbye, is to add just a little bit of glossy accents to her eyes and lips. So you can see by using a pattern paper, the size of a journal page doesn't have to be daunting. It can just be fun and creative. How cool is all that? So just adding a little bit of texture, a bit of colouring, and I've still left myself plenty of room to add some text and some writing down there when I decide what to say. And I've got my journal here. So we're just going to wipe off some glossy accents there before I stick my journal into it. So an A4 journal, and my page will just sit in. Now I've deliberately cut it so that it doesn't fit the hole, so it's a bit narrower than the page. This way it's not going to be blocking up that edge too much, because we have got a little bit of extra thickness with our card. So that's about how it's going to work in the book. And then I'm going to add my writing into it. So thank you very much for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed that one, and hope you enjoy playing with some of these gorgeous papers and combining them with our stamps and stencils and things. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.